happy little games. Since the dawn of video games, the Wild Wild West has always been featured in various forms. We had Wild Gunman released all the way back in 1974. Gunfight. Law of the West. Express Raider. And of course, the entire Red Dead series. Today though, we are taking a look at an arcade title from 1985 which came from the creative mind of Yoshiki Akamoto and goes by the name of Gunsmoke. This innovative vertically scrolling run and gun was a breath of fresh air in the arcades and provided a unique gameplay experience that converted well onto the home Nintendo Entertainment System. Why was this game censored so heavily in other countries? What was the original title for this game? How did this game get its period? So let's strap on our 6-shooter and put on our cowboy boots because this is the history of Gunsmoke. The year is 1985 and Yoshiki Akamoto has come up with the perfect idea for a brand new game. Mr. Akamoto, like so many of his contemporaries, was a big fan of American film and TV shows, especially the old spaghetti westerns from the 60s and 70s. One TV western in particular had caught Mr. Akamoto's peepers that pulled him in with every episode he watched. The TV western in question was Gunsmoke, which followed the exploits of U.S. Marshal Matt Dillon, who has to deal with a different threat to his town of Dodge City, Kansas every week. He was joined by his faithful supporting cast of Doc Adams, Chester, Festus, and of course, Miss Kitty over the span of 20 years, which resulted in 635 episodes. Mr. Akamoto loved the series and thought it would be a fantastic fit for an idea that was percolating in his brain. He had developed the shoot-'em-up 1942 for Capcom, but wanted to create a more grounded take on the genre and thought a Western motif would be perfect. The original plan was for 11 stages with a mini-boss at the end of each one. It wasn't all smooth sailing as he was having trouble coming up with enemy designs as well as the attack patterns. According to Mr. Akamoto, Gunsmoke was a very difficult game to make. It literally took me weeks to think of the movement patterns for a single enemy. Also, while I was trying to come up with graphics and patterns for the characters, I got hit by a bike and broke some bones in my hand. I had to do all the drawing with a red pen that was easy to write with since I couldn't press down with a pencil. Due to the development time taking longer than usual and also being under a bit of pressure from his bosses at Capcom, the 11th stage and boss were dropped. However, I will show the 11th stage and his boss later in the video. The arcade game Commando was developed in conjunction with this game, and there was a lot of idea sharing between the two. Gunsmoke was released a bit later than Commando and actually had a different name. The original name of the game was Gunman, and while Mr. Akamoto liked this title, the higher-ups at Capcom wanted something with a bit more name recognition, so they went with Gunsmoke instead. The legal team thought it would be a good idea to use a period in between gun and smoke, although most people didn't even notice it was there. It wasn't like this in all territories though, with specifically the ROMstar version not including it. And there you have it, my friends, the story of how Gunsmoke got its period. Gunsmoke was released by Capcom in 1985. As the story goes, you take on the role of Billy Bob, who was a bounty hunter going after the nefarious criminals of the Wild Wild West. Apparently, the unnamed town had a bustling gold rush several years before. It is now the target of bandits who steal gold from all of its town people. The community comes together and places a bounty on each of these bandits. It's up to you to take down the enemies of this dusty cowpoke town and save the day. This is a 1 or 2 player vertically scrolling run and gun shooter in which the screen scrolls upward automatically. You're armed with 2 pistols as you blast your way through the various levels, taking down 10 of the most nasty varmints this side of the Rio Grande. Your character has a very peculiar shooting style which includes 3 different firing buttons. The middle one shoots straight ahead. The button on the left will shoot to your left at an angle or 10 o'clock. The right button will shoot at a right angle or 2 o'clock. Combinations of buttons will cause Billy to shoot at different angles. Holding the left and center buttons will allow Billy to shoot at 11 o'clock. Holding the left and right buttons will cause you to shoot your guns in opposite directions. And finally, holding the center and right button will see Billy fire his gun at 1 o'clock. The various enemies that literally crawl out of the saloons and cat houses are a bad bunch indeed. We have gunmen, riflemen, snipers, bombers, and for some reason, enemies that look like punk rockers with their mohawks and green pants. We also have a whole host of Native Americans who are out to get the pale-faced white man, including native gunmen, native archers, native hatchet throwers, and native elders. You will also encounter a peaceful bull unless it feels threatened. If it gets shot, it will start moving down the screen in which it will trample you or gore you, so it's best to steer clear of him. Although you have unlimited ammo, if you take 1 shot, you are dead and gone, sent packing where you will spend the rest of eternity buried in Boot Hill. To aid you in your quest against these Wild West threats, you have various power-ups at your disposal. During each of the stages, you will come across a multitude of different barrels. By shooting them, you may uncover items hidden inside. Billy can carry up to 5 of each power-ups in reserve, so if your character does die, when he returns, he will still be powered up. The power-ups you can receive are boots, which will increase your walking speed, a rifle, which increases the distance your pistols will fire, bullets, which will make the speed of your shot travel faster, a POW symbol, which knocks down any regular enemy on the screen. You are also able to mount a horse which can absorb 3 shots before it's killed. After that, you have to resume walking. Other items you can uncover are bags, bottles, stars, cows, and more. It's not all rainbows and lollipops with items discovered in the barrels, as you have to avoid the cattle skulls. If you happen to collect one, it will reduce each one of Billy Bob's stored power-ups. There is even a Yashichi symbol, which grants you an extra life that appears first on stage 6. There are 10 stages you have to traverse, including towns, rivers, canyons, and tribal lands. A nicely detailed wanted poster is shown at the start of each level, showing you the scum and villainy you have to take down and the amount of the bounty that's on their head. The bosses you encounter are Master, Roy, Ninja, Cutter, Pig Joe. Wolf Chief. Goldsmith. Lost Pubro. Fat Man. And the Wingate Family. This is one tough game, right up there with Ghosts and Goblins in my opinion. The graphics look nice with some slick animation, but the backgrounds do tend to get a bit repetitive. The sound effects and music are really good though, having been composed by Ayako Mori. She would also produce a number of Capcom's greatest hits, including Ghosts and Goblins, 1942, and Trojan. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there was to be an 11th stage, but it was scrapped due to time constraints. The level would have been filled with cacti, which, considering this is a Wild Wild West game, there is a noticeable absence of them. The boss would be wielding dual pistols, and he would hide behind boulders trying to avoid your fire. When the game was released in late 1985, it wasn't as big of a hit as Capcom had hoped for, with Commando quickly overshadowing it. There were a few different versions released worldwide, with the biggest change taking place in Germany. Similar to Commando, this game had major graphical changes in order to abide by Germany's strict laws against killing people in the media. How they got around this was modifying all of the enemies and turning them into cyborgs. This is most noticeable on the wanted posters, although the sprites have been slightly modified as well. Even the wanted poster for the cut 11th boss received a cybernetic makeover. There were a lot of unused sprites in the game, and thanks to the Cutting Room Floor website, we now get a sneak peek of what was intended to be in the game. The series was ported to a few home computers and of course the NES version, which I will discuss in just a moment. The music was so popular in Japan, it was released as a soundtrack by Alpha Records in 1986. This featured all of the music from the arcade game as well as 2 unused tracks. It was also featured as part of a music compilation along with other classic Capcom titles known as Capcom Game Music Volume 1. Contrary to popular belief, this was not the first arcade game to be named Gunsmoke. The first one was released in 1975 by Casco. This was one of the first arcade machines to use a full 360-degree hologram film, which was produced by a laser beam. However, this game did not get its period, and instead relied on a good old-fashioned space in between the 2 words. So technically, this game is called Gun.smoke. The series would lay dormant until early 2000 when Capcom would begin developing a spiritual sequel to this title. The game would take place in the 3rd dimension and be more of a hybrid action story-driven experience than its arcade counterpart. Partway through development, Capcom would cancel the project, but thankfully Rockstar bought the assets and turned it into Red Dead Revolver. This series of events created another fantastic franchise for the company. It has been included in a few different compilations over the years, including Capcom Classics Collection and the Capcom Arcade Cabinet.
After these messages, we'll be right back. Gun.smoke. 悪を倒し、西部の街を救え。ヒーローにキス。本格シューティングゲーム。Gun.smoke. Capcom.
The home version most people are familiar with is the NES version, which was released in 1988. This version was quite different from the arcade original, and features a brand new storyline. The game takes place in 1849 during the Gold Rush era, in which a band of outlaws known as the Wingates have raided the town of Hicksville and killed its sheriff. It's up to Billy Bob to catch those vicious criminals and bring them to justice, preferably with a tall tree and a short piece of rope. Changes to the control system had to be made due to the NES having 2 fire buttons and the arcade having 3. So that means you are only able to fire left, right, or straight ahead. The power-ups are still hidden inside barrels and they are all pretty much the same, except now you can uncover a blue Yashichi which provides you with temporary invulnerability. One of the first changes from the arcade game is that you have to locate the hidden wanted posters in each stage, otherwise you'll never be able to encounter the boss and the level will continue forever. Another neat little addition is the ability to go shopping. You can purchase different weapons including machine guns, smart bombs, and even a horse if you're able to locate one. Speaking of, if you have the cash to flash and don't feel like searching for the hidden wanted poster, you can end up buying it from the shop. There are only 6 stages carried over from the arcade game, which include the town of Hicksville, the boulders, Comanche Village, Death Mountain, Cheyenne River, and Fort Wingate. The bosses have been brought over mostly intact, although there are some small differences between them. A version for the Japanese Famicom Disk System was also released that featured a few new changes over this one, including slightly different wanted posters and not as many music tracks due to the limited space on the FDS storage media. Initially, there was only one officially licensed version of Gunsmoke for the home computer market. The game appeared on 4 computer platforms, but 2 of them started out life as clones. The clones in question were called Desperado and were released by Spanish developer Toposoft. They were granted an official license for the UK's release, but they didn't bother altering any of the in-game code aside from the title screen. This is why all of the bosses and maps are similar, but not quite the same. The first one we are looking at is the Spectrum version. Yellow and black are where it's at because these are primarily the colors you'll see the most. You will get a few more on the title screen and the wanted posters in between each level though. The scrolling is not very fast and it doesn't control bad, although not as tight as you would like. The sound is typical bloops and bleeps, but thankfully there isn't much of them to go around. Since this is a clone, a lot of the extras are completely missing, with the barrels having been replaced by sheriff stars which uncover hidden lives or points. There are no power-ups or horses to be found. There's also only 5 stages to complete. Next up is the Amstrad version. For a clone, this turned out pretty well with detailed sprites and plenty of color. The scrolling is fairly smooth, but the gameplay speed is a bit on the slow side. We have minimalistic sound with the occasional blast of 100% pure queefaroonie whenever a bomb goes off. You only have 5 stages to get through and only 3 lives to do it with. However, more lives can be picked up along the way. It doesn't play bad, but not quite as good as the arcade or the NES version. The good old Commodore 64 version is up next, and it's not looking very good. This one is officially licensed by Capcom since it was developed from the ground up, and it does follow the arcade structure. You start off with a full screen shot of the wanted poster, and it looks really good, but it all goes downhill from there. The graphics are large but a bit on the bloated side, and for some reason Billy Bob is now dressed all in gray. Perhaps he was going for a camouflage look. The scrolling is smooth, but it is a tad slow. The controls have been modified so walking left or right will automatically shoot in the appropriate direction without having to press the fire button. The only time you have to press the fire button is if you want to shoot straight ahead. The power-ups did make it into this conversion, although they are not as plentiful as found in the arcade game. At least your faithful horse Silver made the transition into this game. The enemy placement is also a bit off, and for example, the bulls now show up in the first level. The music is decent, but the SID chip is capable of oh so much more. Not much is known about the MSX version except that the physical format of the game is very rare. This looks to be a conversion of the NES title, which explains why everything looks a bit different than the Amstrad or Spectrum version. This was converted by ProSoft in 1990, and from what I can gather it was released only in Korea. There are only 3 stages available, and similar to the NES, you actually have to find the wanted poster before you can fight the bosses. Everything looks pretty good with lots of detail and a fair amount of color. The speed of the game is on par with the arcade original, but the scrolling is extremely choppy. My eyeballs were all aflutter after playing this for just a short while. The music has been rendered pretty faithfully on the little MSX, and to be honest, I prefer the music on this version over the Commodore 64. The controls are also not too shabby for this conversion. And now we have another oddity, which appears to be an unauthorized version for the Sega Master System. I haven't seen this many unauthorized offspring since high school. The game is clearly based on the MSX version right down to the choppy scrolling and similar looking graphics. The gameplay is still fast and furious, and there's even music, although not quite as good as found in other versions. It was also released as part of Capcom Generation's Blazing Guns, which included Commando and Mercs. The version released for the Sega Saturn and PlayStation is very cool indeed. It features a lot of extras, including different screen modes, artwork, and absolutely fantastic rearranged music. The game was also released as a Java game for mobile phones in the mid-2000s. For an early mobile phone game, it's not too bad, although the controls on the emulator I was using were very stiff. Billy Bob fires continuously with the lower row of keys toggling between the different shooting modes. The graphics are colorful and you do get the power-ups from the arcade, but the game is slow as molasses. The music, however, is very good indeed. Gunsmoke was not that big of a hit when it debuted in the arcades, and it was quickly overshadowed by Commando. With that being said, it's still a great game to play, and it's also tough as nails. So if you've ever wanted to rescue the town of Hicksville, all the while putting a little jangle in your pocket, be sure and give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.